What's going on, guys? Super Savage 789 here, bringing you guys a video. Today we're doing War of Ultron Was Good Part 4. In the last part, we covered how Ultron being good changed the events in Infinity War in a drastic way. The Guardians never ended up crossing paths with Earth's heroes due to Thor never meeting them. Ultimately, the ending of Infinity War was the same, with Thanos snapping, which is where we'll pick up from. The Avengers would be at their main base of operation, trying to get a census on what happened. Thankfully, they'd have an accurate number of missing people due to Ultron's connection to the internet. It unfortunately does confirm that Thanos was telling the truth. When Carol shows up, thankfully she won't have to venture into space to save Tony, since he is on Earth already. Speaking of Tony, he'd be beating himself up a lot more than he was originally. Here his ego was the reason Thanos managed to rewind time and revive the Mind Stone. They all fought him that maybe they could have won. So Tony and Thor both be depressed and moping. After detecting a massive amount of cosmic radiation, they pinpoint the location of where Thanos is. Here on the trip, both Tony and Ultron would go along, with Bruce staying on Earth. They show up on the garden and are quick to apprehend him, learn that he had snapped away the stones. Thor would then kill the injured Thanos, and they all depart back to Earth at a loss. Over the 5 years, we'd have a few changes that should be noted. Bruce would be able to become Professor Hulk much quicker since he's been in the Gamma Lab for a lot longer. His optimism would really make Natasha a much happier soul, especially seeing Bruce doing good despite the bad time they're in. Since Bruce had decided to become a hero, Natasha would begin to assist her husband. They wouldn't just stop there, however. They decided to reunite the Avengers and form a new team. This team would consist of themselves, as well as Steve, Rhodey, and Ultron. Speaking of Ultron, some significant things would happen with him. First thing he'd be focusing on would be reviving the Vision body he had made. Now equipped with some Wakandan data he stole from Shuri's lab, as well as a bunch of scrap metal from his destroyed drones in the fight, he'd begin to get to work remaking himself. It'd take about a year, but he'd get it done. Ultron would also become a key figure in the time after the snap. His drones would become much more helpful to people in everyday life. They'd replace jobs where people had disappeared from, and would help keep everyone safe as best they can from things that don't require the Avengers. Up in space, Nebula and Rocket would go their separate ways, but would still keep in touch quite frequently. They'd go around stealing and drinking to get by, living on a planet no one else would come to. Titan. They live there, praying for the day the Guardians will come back. Beyond that though, not much really changes. Scott would still come out of the van 5 years after the snap, where he meets his aged-up daughter. He then heads to Avengers base, being greeted by the 5 main Avengers. He explains what happened, and they decide on the time travel plan. Ultron and Bruce would stay at the Avengers base, figuring out time travel, while everyone else heads out to recruit people. Natasha would head to Japan, where she would still recruit Clint like normal. Steve would head to New Asgard, where he would head to Thor's home, learning he has become fat. After a conversation with Thor, Steve would manage to convince Thor by giving him a speech about how they should all shoulder the blame. Rhodey and Scott head to Tony, who'd be more willing to help. Remember, he's feeling a lot more guilt over their loss, and unlike Thor, he isn't the type to come fat over it. He might have had a drinking problem initially, but having this quiet life with his new family would sort that out. So he'd go back with them. With the team set and time travel figured out, they begin to brainstorm where to go. A side note I should have mentioned in the last part is, I do think that Thor would know about how the Collector had the Power Stone, at least briefly. It does seem like a thing that would go around the galaxy, and Thor's traveling around the galaxy doing different things, looking for Infinity Stones. So I do think that one way or another he would find that out. Thor would be quite important as well to the plan, and would be forced to sober up, and give advice since he'd have knowledge on half of the Infinity Stones, meaning he'd be key in explaining what to do and where to go. After everyone explains the stones, Ultron would begin to do some calculations and realize what would be the most efficient way of collecting them. With no knowledge of Morag but knowledge of the Collector's Vault, a team would be sent there to collect the Power and Reality Stone. This team would be Ultron, Rhodey, and Thor. After arriving at nowhere, Natasha and Clint would depart, leaving the trio to head to the Collector's Vault. They'd be forced to sneak around, going past the bar on the way there. Unfortunately, Thor is a loose cannon and the smell of booze is too irresistible to him, so he'd wander off. When the duo realize he's gone, they decide to merely leave him and get the stone first. Ultron and Rhodey show up at the vault while Ultron would sneak inside, phasing through the wall like a ghost. Doing his best to signal the radiation, Ultron begins sneakily floating through the vault where he discovers the Reality Stone in a jar. He would take it and reunite with Rhodey. Meanwhile, Thor would be watching different creatures gambling and drinking, and would love every second of it. As he's doing so, he'd run into a trio of individuals who'd rub him the wrong way. So an argument would ensue between Rocket, Drax, and Thor, while Groot backs up his furry buddy. When Peter and Gamora return, they begin to try and break up the fight. Thor, however, wouldn't help the situation. He informs them all that from where he is from, if individuals disagree and don't fight, it'll lead to hate and rage, and ultimately the destruction of everything they love. He then says that it's probably for the best, as the rabbit wouldn't have a chance anyway. This would be the straw that broke the camel's back, as Rocket snaps, pulling out his blaster and shooting rapidly all around the room. Everyone ducks for cover as Drax leaps at Rocket and begins to fight against him and Groot. Peter will jump into the mix, leading to the orb falling out his pocket. It rolls to Thor's feet, leading to him picking it up, realizing what it is quite quickly. Before Peter can stop him, Thor would time travel away. With all the stones, they begin reconstructing the gauntlet. Ultron tries to have various bodies snap so no one hurts themselves, but unfortunately none of them can survive the radiation. Even his main body won't last long enough due to the gamma radiation corroding the metal, making him basically just a lifeless husk again. So Bruce would still snap. Everyone would come back, and that'd be it. No Nebula time travel means no Thanos time travel, so the third act of Endgame doesn't happen. This means that Tony would ultimately survive. We would also never learn Steve is worthy, especially since they never got Mjolnir from Asgard. Steve would still time travel though, where he gives Sam the shield, becoming old like normal. Tony would go back to his family as well as Peter, where he'd begin living a much happier life. He may even join the Avengers, though you can argue it either way. For sake of the matters, we'll say he doesn't. As for Thor, unfortunately his character arc would never occur, meeting his mother and learning he's worthy. This means Thor would still be on New Asgard, drinking and vibing, which leaves him much worse off. However, I do think he would still shun responsibilities to Valkyrie. From here we transition into what we know as WandaVision, only here there'd be no WandaVision. Vision never existed, so she'd never create the Hex, meaning the TV show would never occur. Instead, I believe we'd get a movie called The Maximoffs, with Pietro and Wanda taking on Agatha Harkness. We saw how easy Wanda bodied Agatha in canon, so that happened normally, all the way to Wanda mind-wiping Agatha and taking the Darkhold. At the end though, we'd get a nice scene between the siblings. Wanda tells Pietro that she's going to leave to study her new power, and that for now this is goodbye. They do a hug as Pietro watches his sister fly away. From there, Pietro will then join the Avengers, since he had nothing better to do. Something else to note, at least for the future anyway, Monica will never get her powers, which is a real bummer because I love those powers, and Jimmy Woo will never get a return. Poor Jimmy Woo. As for Falcon and Winter Soldier, at the time of writing this, we only have 2 episodes out, so I can't say how that would go. Can't imagine it'll be much different though, so it'd probably go about the same, maybe a few references to Ultron or the Avengers, but that's about it. In Far From Home, Nick Fury would approach Tony about the elementals rather than calling a teenager to take care of it. I do think that Tony would accept this mission, and so he'd travel with Fury to go and stop these creatures. Tony would meet Quentin Beck and wouldn't recognize him to the Trickster's relief. After hearing his ploy about dimensions, Tony would begin doing some research on what he's been saying, using footage of the previous monster to help him. Jarvis would analyze the footage and begin to talk about what the Sandman appears to be made of. Tony realizes that a creature made up of this specific kind of sand would not be able to hold itself up under its own weight. This would be suspicious to Tony, and so he'd be prepared for anything when the next one attacks. Naturally, the Hydro Man thing would happen, however Mysterio times it perfectly. He does it when he believes Tony is back in America to get a burger, so he doesn't have to deal with him. Thankfully, though, this was a ploy by Tony. He'd come in his Iron Man armor and begin to analyzing the situation. As he's doing so, Jarvis alerts him that Peter is here, which surprises Tony. He'd fly down and grab Peter, making it look as if he's saving him as he greets him, asking what he's doing here. When he learns it's a school trip, he realizes this is a big coincidence. Hydro Man would be focusing on civilians, which gives Tony no time to attack it, which gives the Illusion more time before Mysterio steps in. Knowing he needs the help, Tony deploys 17A, leading to Peter getting the Iron Spider armor. Tony then tells him to help civilians, which he'd agree to. As Mysterio begins to fight, Jarvis would be recording and analyzing the footage while Tony sits on the sidelines just watching. After Mysterio wins, Tony applauds him as a great hero and that drinks are on him tonight. He then returned to Solitude to conduct more research. That night, Peter would be brought in by Fury to meet Mysterio. That's when Tony comes in, acting all smug as he shows on screens the footage of the fight. He then shows it without any special effects, showing off the use of Bath. Finally, Tony displays all the crimes Quentin Beck has been charged with, so he'd be arrested on the spot, as well as his crew, which is where the movie would end, quite anticlimactically. This is also where this part's going to end, because there's not really much else we can cover right now. If you enjoyed this What If, then, let me know what you think. MCU What Ifs, they're fun, but they're challenging to make, at least have some changes. I quite enjoy this What If as a whole, much more than I usually do my content. And I plan to make more in the future, so subscribe if you like that. And yeah, bye.